What's up everybody, blessed be, my name is Manon and you are watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. This video offers my personal views on the topic at hand. Please visit me on other platforms as well, including Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon, all linked down in the description below. The full script of this video and many of the others is available on my Patreon account for download if desired to build your own Witch in the Working Book of Shadows. Do you need help with a spell or fancy a tarot reading? Shoot on over to my store, Bewitching and Bizarre, linked down in the description below for your personalized working and or reading. Alright, let's be real. When you hear words like wizard, witch, sorcerer, or magician, your brain probably jumps straight to fantasy books, blockbuster movies, or maybe a Halloween costume or two. And honestly, that's totally fair. Pop culture has taken these archetypes and tossed them into every enchanted forest, castle tower, and dusty dungeon you can imagine. But here's the thing, they didn't start there. These magical identities have deep, rich histories and meanings that go far beyond spellbooks and sparkly robes. In this episode of Witch in the Working, we're going to talk all about wizards, sorcerers, magicians, and witches, compare them and learn their differences as they all exist today outside of fantasy books and movies. Let's learn who and what these archetypes really are. Roll intro. Welcome back everyone. So first let's set the stage. Before we dive into each one individually, it's important to understand what they represent as a group and why they've been such lasting figures in both magical world and the public imagination. First off, let's acknowledge the big elephant in the broom closet. People use these terms interchangeably all the time. You'll hear someone say wizard when they mean magician, or witch when they're talking about someone who does any kind of spell work. That's okay. Language is fluid and how we use it changes with time. But if we look closer, each of these archetypes has its own distinct flavor, its own energy, and its own path through the mystical woods. A good way to think about these differences is by looking at how they relate to power and knowledge. A wizard, for example, is usually seen as someone who studies, the scholar of the bunch. They love systems, logic, and theory. They're the ones buried in scrolls and tombs, mapping out magical formulas and decoding ancient symbols. On the other hand, a sorcerer might not need all that. Sorcery is raw, it's instinctual. It's like plugging directly into the current of magic without necessarily needing to understand the wiring. Then you've got the magician, who's all about ritual and willpower. These folks follow patterns, align themselves with planetary forces, and often work within well-defined systems like ceremonial magic or hermetic traditions. And of course, there's the witch, deeply tied to the land, the moon, the cycles of life. Witches often work with nature, spirit, and ancestral wisdom. Their magic isn't always flashy, but it's potent, personal, and grounded. Now you might be thinking, can someone be more than one of these? Absolutely. In fact, many practitioners are. These labels aren't rigid. They're more like archetypal hats you can try on, depending on your path, your personality, or even just your mood. Some days you might be a book-loving wizard, other days a hedge witch brewing stormwater tea under a full moon. You're not locked in. Another key point, these terms have been shaped and sometimes twisted by history. During the Middle Ages, sorcery was often used in a negative light, especially by religious authorities trying to control what they didn't understand. Witch was demonized for centuries, often used as an accusation rather than a self-claimed identity. Magician and wizard were safer in some areas, mostly because they were seen as more scholarly or male-coded, which says a lot about how gender played into all of this too. Speaking of that, we should touch on the whole gender thing real quick. A lot of people assume that witches are women and wizards are men, but that's a modern stereotype, not a spiritual rule. In reality, magical archetypes aren't bound by gender. There are male and female witches, male and female magicians, male and female wizards, and male and female sorcerers. You name it. It cares about your intention, your energy, and your connection to the craft. So why even bother untangling these words if they all overlap? Because understanding the differences helps you better understand yourself or the kind of magic you're drawn to. It's like having a compass when you step onto your path. Whether you feel like a structured ceremonial magician or a barefoot hedge witch, owning your archetype or blend of them adds depth to your practice. In the end, all 4 of these magical figures share one thing. They represent different ways of working with unseen forces to shape reality. Some paths are intellectual, some are intuitive. Some call the stars, some call the spirits. But all of them are valid, powerful, and worth exploring. And now that we've set the stage, let's take a closer look at each of these archetypes, starting with the wise, bookish, robe-wearing scholar we all know and love, the wizard. So let's talk wizards. When you hear the word, you probably picture someone with a long beard, pointy hat, maybe even a robe covered in stars and moons, kind of like Merlin's distant cousin or the older dude in your favorite fantasy game. And hey, that's not totally off base, but the real essence of a wizard goes way deeper than just their wardrobe. Wizards at their core are all about knowledge. They're the researchers, the thinkers, the ones who want to know how magic works, not just what it does. If you ever found yourself up at 2 a.m. reading a dusty old book about planetary correspondences or diving into ancient grimoires just for fun, guess what? You've got some wizard energy in you. Unlike some of the other magical archetypes who might lean into intuition or raw force, wizards tend to walk the path of structure and study. They treat magic like a science, complete with experimentation, observation, and a whole lot of note-taking. They don't just light a candle and hope for the best. They want to know why this herb corresponds to Jupiter or how the phases of the moon influence a spell's potency. Think of them like magical engineers crafting spells with precision and purpose. Historically, the idea of the wizard really took off during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. These weren't just spellcasters, they were astronomers, alchemists, mathematicians, and philosophers. People like John Dee, advisor to Queen Elizabeth I and major player in Enochian magic, didn't just dabble in spells. They blended science and spirituality, often walking a very thin line between respected scholar and dangerous heretic. And that's kind of the wizard's whole deal. They operate at the edge of the known. They're not just following some old tradition blindly. They're digging into it, rewriting it, and sometimes inventing completely new systems along the way. This isn't magic for the faint of heart. It's deep, detailed, and a bit intense. But for those who vibe with it, it's also incredibly empowering. A lot of modern ceremonial magicians actually fall under the wizard's umbrella. Systems like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Thelema, or Enochian magic are built on layers of study, ritual, and symbolic structure. If you've ever worked with the Kabbalah, planetary hours, or color correspondences that feel more like a college syllabus than a spell recipe, you've walked in wizard territory. Now let's not confuse wizards with people who just hoard information. A true wizard doesn't study just for the sake of sounding smart. Their knowledge is applied. They use it to effect change, to heal, to guide, and sometimes to protect. Their spells are well researched, their rituals are planned out, and their journals are probably filled with pages of trial and error notes. You'll often find them working with very specific tools, staffs, wands, books, and crystals, each one selected for a reason. Their altars aren't usually just aesthetic. Everything has a place, a function, and a connection to their wider system of thought. But let's keep it grounded. You don't need to join a fancy order or learn Latin to connect with your inner wizard. Being a wizard can simply mean that your magical path is one of curiosity, structure, and wisdom seeking. It's for those who want to understand magic as much as they want to practice it. And here's a cool thing. Wizard energy isn't about age or gender. You can be a teenage wizard who just started charting lunar cycles in a notebook, or a 75-year-old practitioner who's been studying astrological influences for decades. It's about mindset. If you're constantly asking questions, connecting dots, and fine-tuning your practice like a magical scientist, then yeah, you're speaking the wizard's language. Pop culture often simplifies wizards into stuffy old men muttering in towers, but in reality, wizardry is one of the most dynamic and evolving archetypes out there. It's about tapping into deep knowledge, working smart, and using the wisdom of the ages to craft something uniquely yours. So if you're the type who loves building magical systems from scratch, organizing your spell work like a spreadsheet, or debating the finer points of esoteric symbolism with your coven over coffee, you might just be a wizard, my friend. Alright, let's shake things up and talk about the sorcerer, the edgy cousin in the magical family. If the wizard is the studious professor with glasses slipping down his nose, the sorcerer is the lone wolf working out of a cabin deep in the woods, lit only by candlelight and sheer will. There's something fierce about the sorcerer archetype. It's not just about spellcraft, it's about power, unfiltered and often a little unpredictable. So what makes a sorcerer different from the rest? Well, while wizards chase knowledge and witches often work with nature's rhythms, sorcerers are all about command. They don't always follow a structured system or rely on ceremonial rituals. In fact, they might even toss the rulebook out the window or write their own. Sorcery is personal, it's visceral, it's the kind of magic that bubbles up from the deep within and answers only to the sorcerer's intent. Think of it like this: where a magician might align with planetary hours to boost a spell, a sorcerer taps directly into the raw energy behind it and bends it to their will. There's not a whole lot of asking permission going on here. It's more of a watch me work kind of vibe. Historically speaking, the word sorcerer has had a rough ride. It's been tangled up with fear, superstition, and demonization for centuries. In medieval times, being labeled a sorcerer usually meant folks thought you were up to no good, conjuring spirits, cursing crops, or making deals with things better left unnamed. But let's be real. Most of that came from misunderstandings and fear of independent power, especially when it didn't play nice with the church or the crown. Modern sorcerers, though, have reclaimed that title. For many, it represents freedom. It's about standing outside of tradition and forging your own path through the metaphysical jungle. You'll often see sorcerers working with spirits, ancestors, or entities, sometimes in very direct ways. They're also known for using sigils, poppets, bones, and blood magic, stuff that might make a beginner pause but is incredibly effective when done with clarity and respect. One of the most fascinating things about sorcery is that it often crosses into the realm of folk magic. Root workers, cunning folk, brujas, and conjure doctors all carry that sorceress spark. Their magic is hands-on, practical, and deeply tied to survival and results. It's not about pretty altars or elaborate robes. It's about making things happen, whether that's protection, love, justice, or money. Now let's talk about intention, because sorcery demands it. This path isn't for the half-hearted. Sorcerers need strong willpower. If your mind's fuzzy or your focus is off, the work probably won't land right. That's why many sorcerers spend time building their personal energy, practicing visualization, or working with meditative techniques that strengthen their command over subtle forces. You also don't typically see sorcerers working in groups or formal covens. Their path is often solitary, not because they're antisocial, but because their magic is so personal. They might call upon spirits or work with guides, but at the end of the day, it's their relationship with those energies that drives the work, not a shared liturgy or a scripted ritual, for instance. And here's the kicker. Sorcery isn't always flashy. Sure, it can be, especially in fantasy novels or video games where sorcerers are blasting fireballs and raising skeleton armies. But in the real world, sorcery might look like a quiet whisper over a jar of nails, a charm tucked into a coat pocket, or a single candle lit with fierce intent. It's subtle, potent, and often hidden in plain sight. So if you're the kind of person who wants to craft your own path, trust your instincts, and learn through direct experience rather than textbooks, you might already be a sorcerer. It's a path that asks for boldness, authenticity, and sometimes a bit of a risk. But for those who walk it, the rewards are just as intense as the power they wield. Alright, let's slide into the realm of the magician, the one who stands between the worlds with purpose in one hand and a ritual dagger in the other. Now, when most folks hear the word magician, they either think of a guy pulling a rabbit out of a top hat or some flashy Vegas stage show. Let me stop you right there. That's not the magician that we're talking about. In the occult world, the magician is something entirely different. This is the practitioner who brings intention, form, and focus into alignment. The magician is like the architect of the metaphysical realm. They don't just do magic, they build it, design it, shape it. Every symbol they use, every movement they make, and every word they speak is chosen with care. Their power lies in understanding the connections between all things, how the seen and the unseen dance together when guided by will. What sets the magician apart from the other archetypes that we've talked about is structure. This isn't about improvising on the fly or riding the waves of wild energy. This is about preparation, balance, and precision. If the sorcerer is the one casting a spell with instinct and raw emotion, the magician is the one who mapped it out the night before, calculated the planetary alignment, cleansed their space, and probably ironed their ritual robe. At the heart of the magician's path is ceremonial magic, a practice rooted in ancient traditions like Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and Renaissance occultism. These systems often involve complex rituals, sacred geometry, divine names, and a heavy dose of symbolism. It might sound like a lot, and to be fair, it kind of is, but that's the point. The ceremony, the formality, the pageantry, it's all there to move the mind and spirit into a heightened state of awareness. It's not just about the show, it's about tapping into deep layers of reality with clarity and control. And speaking of clarity, one of the magician's biggest strengths is the ability to channel willpower into a specific result. This isn't just wishing and hoping. This is the trained focus of someone who's honed their craft like a martial artist. A magician understands that magic isn't about bending the universe to your every whim. It's about aligning with its currents so that your intention flows where it needs to go. Let's also talk about tools, because the magician's got a whole kit. You usually find the wand representing will, the cup symbolizing emotion and intuition, the sword or athame for intellect and clarity, and the pentacle for grounding and physical manifestation. These aren't just props, they're anchors for specific energies. When used in ritual, they help the magician direct forces with precision, like a conductor leading a symphony of subtle energies. One of the coolest things about the magician archetype is how it shows up across cultures and time periods, from the ancient Egyptian priest magicians to the grimoires of the Middle Ages, and even in the tarot, where the magician stands as the bridge between heaven and earth, pointing upward and downward, saying as above so below. This figure is the very definition of manifestation. Now, is ceremonial magic for everyone? Not necessarily. Some folks find it too rigid or overly complicated, and no, that's okay. For those who love to dive into systems, who enjoy the mental challenge of decoding symbols, or who feel empowered by well-defined ritual spaces, the path of the magician can be incredibly fulfilling. That said, you don't have to be a part of a magical order to tap into this archetype. You don't need a temple room or a Latin vocabulary. You just need focused will, a sense of sacred timing, and a desire to work with the universe rather than against it. Whether you're crafting your own ritual based on planetary hours, or simply lighting a candle while visualizing a specific outcome, if you're aligning action with intention, you're in the magician's territory. So if you're the type who finds meaning in form, loves a good ritual setup, and gets a thrill from precise spell work, you might just be walking on the path of the magician. It's not always flashy, but it is deeply empowering, and as with all true magic, it begins with knowing yourself. Okay, let's bring this magical journey full circle and talk about the one archetype most people think they do understand, the witch. From broomsticks and black cats to spell jars and moon rituals, witches have been portrayed in just about every way imaginable. Sometimes feared, sometimes revered, sometimes just completely misunderstood. But underneath all the cultural noise, the witch is one of the most powerful, personal, and versatile magical identities out there. At their core, witches are earth-rooted, spirit-connected individuals who work with the natural rhythms of life. They don't always follow a set tradition, though many do. Some are Wiccan, some are folk witches, some work with ancestral spirits, and some blend a little bit of everything into their craft. What unites them isn't a specific spellbook or a strict doctrine, it's a relationship with the world around them. Witches see magic in the turning of the seasons, the phases of the moon, the whisper of herbs in the garden, and even in the quiet moments of stirring intention into a cup of tea. Witchcraft, in many ways, is intuitive and lived. It's not something you just read about, it's something you do, something you feel in your bones. A witch might cast a circle and call the quarters, or they might just light a candle and have a conversation with spirit. It can be elaborate or simple, public or private. There's no one right way to be a witch, and that's part of what makes this path so magnetic for so many. Historically, the word witch wasn't always something folks, claimed proudly. For a long time, it was a dangerous label, often used as a weapon. Women, and sometimes men, who were healers, midwives, herbalists, or just a little too independent were often called witches, and not in a friendly way. We all know the stories, trials, accusations, executions, but despite centuries of persecution, the witch archetype never went away. It survived in stories and whispered spells passed down through families, and in the secret lives of those who refused to let the old ways die. Fast forward into today, and the witch is undergoing a major reclamation. More people than ever are proudly identifying as witches, redefining what it means on their own terms. For some, it's deeply spiritual. For others, it's political. For many, it's a blend of both. The modern witch may honor the elements, work with the deities, cast spells for healing or justice, or simply embrace their inner power in a world that often tries to take it away. Let's talk tools for a sec. The witch's toolkit is often a mix of the practical and the symbolic. You've got candles, herbs, crystals, cords, jars, poppets, cauldrons, brooms, and more. But here's the thing, none of these are required. A witch can do powerful work with just intention and breath. The items are there to help focus energy, honor tradition, and connect to specific spirits or forces, but the real power comes from within the practitioner. And while we're at it, let's bust the myth that witches are all about curses and control. Sure, there are witches who practice baneful magic, just like there are people in any walk of life who use their skills selfishly. But most witches are focused on healing, protection, growth, and empowerment. They're the ones whispering blessings into the wind, not hexes. They light candles for sick friends, charm their homes for peace, and speak to their ancestors for guidance, not because they're trying to control the world, but because they care about it deeply. Witchcraft is also deeply personal. Some witches work with gods or goddesses. Some don't work with deities at all. Some follow the wheel of the year, while others use their own intuitive calendar. The path is as unique as the person walking it. That's part of the beauty of it. You get to make yours. So if you've ever felt drawn to the moon, or whispered a wish into the wind, or found yourself talking to your plants like they're old friends, you might already be walking the witch's path. It's not about looking a certain way or owning a ton of fancy tools. It's about connection to nature, to spirit, to the unseen threads that weave through everyday life. And that's what sets the witch apart. Not flashy power, not scholarly knowledge, not ceremonial grandeur, but presence. The witch lives their magic. They breathe it. They embody it in the way they move throughout the world. It's grounded, it's sacred, and it's timeless. At the end of the day, whether you vibe with the structured mind of the wizard, the instinctual fire of the sorcerer, the ritual mastery of the magician, or the earthly wisdom of the witch, it's all part of the same beautiful spectrum of magical expression. These archetypes aren't about putting yourself into a box. They're more like mirrors, helping you recognize the kind of energy you naturally flow with. Some folks stick to one lane, while others blend a little bit of each. There's no right or wrong way to do it. For instance, in a lot of witchcraft today, you have witchcraft, and then with a lot of the altars and with the quarters and things like that, that's a lot of ceremonial magic. So in a way, a lot of witches, a lot of them, are very much witches / magicians in one. There's no right or wrong way to do it. What matters is that you walk your path with honesty, curiosity, and intention. So wherever you are in your journey, just starting out or decades in, I hope this gave you some clarity and maybe even a few aha moments. The magical world is vast and varied, and these roles aren't about hierarchy or who's more powerful. They're about understanding yourself, honoring your strengths, and finding a rhythm that resonates with your soul. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and above all, keep making your magic your own, because in the end, you are the spell, the spark, and the story. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Witch in the Working. Do you consider yourself a wizard, sorcerer, magician, or witch? Do you know anyone who does? Let us all know in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and please subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to ring that little bell to be reminded of the wonderful and exciting future episodes to come. I love you guys and gals. Blessed be.